It's September 2003 in Columbia, Missouri. Mitch Kemp and his wife, Tasha Fields, are at home looking after their baby daughter.
Mitch was a very nice guy. He loved his family, and he was just one of those very caring individuals. He loved his brothers. He came from a big family.
Mitch was eager to start a family of his own. He had married his first wife at a young age.
Mitch had previously been married for a very, very long time. He and his wife did get divorced, and then shortly thereafter he met Tasha.
And when Mitch fell for Tasha, he fell fast and he fell hard.
Tasha Fields is a very attractive woman at that time. She had long blonde hair. I can see why Mitch would fall in love with Tasha, because she was very energetic and she made people feel very special.
Tasha was a nice-figured woman, and I think that, that was someone that he really thought was a really good catch for him, maybe even a step up for him. And so he was definitely really, really into her.
And Tasha is thrilled to be with Mitch, too. For her, it's a nice change after a string of tough relationships.
She would tell a lot of family stories, a lot of things that had happened in her life that they just felt like were tragic. She's had such a hard lot in life. Now she's kind of found a good family, a family that loves her, wants to take care of her.
When Tasha gets pregnant, everything in Tasha and Mitch's life seems like it's falling into place, but it's destined not to last. Tasha gives birth to a daughter in September 2002. They spend another 10 months together before officially marrying in July 2003. Mitch's family starts believing that Tasha is cleverly manipulating Mitch's kind nature.
I do believe Tasha went after Mitch because she saw him as an easy target, as someone that could help her, because she was always playing the victim, and he was someone that could love her.
She just seemed to have this ability to manipulate or get men to do things that even they had never done before.
Mitch begins to distance himself from his old life and his family. Even more alarming, his family starts noticing dark changes in Mitch's behavior.
After he met Tasha, he was arrested once. He started doing drugs, and his family noticed that he started acting in a very unusual way.
By that fall, the very brief honeymoon period is definitely over for Tasha and Mitch. Only 3 months after their wedding, and it seems all they do is argue.
According to the Kemp family, once they were married, the relationship between Mitch and Tasha did begin to worsen. There was a lot of fighting.
Soon, it takes its toll. Tasha decides to move out, leaving Mitch behind.
Mitch isn't happy about the situation. He was most concerned about their daughter and wanted to make sure he got his time with their daughter.
But even after all the fighting and the abrupt separation, Tasha and Mitch can't stay away from each other.
For Tasha, more is more. So even though Tasha left Mitch, she continues to see him and have some kind of important connection with him.
They were broken up, but it was never finality with them because they were always back and forth with each other in one way or another.
Soon after she leaves Mitch, Tasha meets a handsome farmer named Greg Morton.
Greg's big. He looks mean, but he's not. He's a good guy. He's not near as scary as what he looks in pictures.
Greg Morton had never been married. He did have a daughter. He had some military background, I believe. Just really kind of a laborer, kind of a country guy.
Greg, like Mitch, is powerfully drawn in by Tasha's beauty and vulnerability.
Greg, probably more than anybody, honed in on the woman in distress. It was somebody that I could take care of, that it seemed like there was always drama in her life. There was always something for me to save her from. And you just felt like you had to, felt compelled to do that. I think the relationship becomes pretty physical pretty quickly. Greg still has no idea that she's married.
After drawing Greg in with her sultry ways, he is hooked. And by the end of 2003, Tasha is heavily involved in a steamy affair with Greg Morton.
I think that Tasha uses everything she has, sex and everything else, to bring people in. Very, very quickly, she zeroes in on what you like and what keeps you going.
Sex had to be involved. I mean, there were so many men that were so willing to drop everything in their lives and protect her and listen to her story and defend her throughout, no matter what. And there's only one logical answer as to why those guys would be going down for her.
Even though their affair is heating up, Tasha still doesn't tell Greg she's married to Mitch. But Tasha's double life is about to be exposed. In the early winter of 2004, Mitch is becoming suspicious of his estranged wife's behavior. Even though they're separated, they're still very much involved. He believes she's seeing someone else.
Mitch isn't happy because Tasha, is dating another man.
When Mitch confronts Tasha, he reveals a shocking new level of rage and darkness.
Mitch has suspected that she was having an affair because they're still married. She was. And so they were over there fighting about this. She calls the police. The police come out. Now in that report, she tells the police that he assaulted me. He tried to choke me, and he knocked my daughter out of my hands.
Mitch is arrested, charged with assaulting his wife, and sentenced to 5 weeks behind bars. But when Tasha tells Greg about what's happened, certain details have changed. Suddenly, it's much worse than an assault. It's a horror story.
She tells Greg that Mitch has raped her. She also tells him that he's molested the child.
Tasha is setting the stage for what she wants to happen next.
She's already thinking, I'm gonna have to add to this story to create enough sympathy with Greg Morton that he's gonna let me come live with him.
Tasha's lies go unquestioned. And in February 2004, she's fully living with Greg Morton on his 37-acre farm.
She moved in with Greg and her daughter, and they became a family. Fairly quickly after, they hit it off, and that was that.
Just like with her and Mitch, it seems like they're dating, and then it goes from that to pretty serious relationship, moving in together.
Tasha discovered something very powerful. It's called sex. She used her sexuality to brilliantly reel men in. And men like women, once they are sexually involved, especially if they're having the best sex they've ever had in their life, they get attached.
And now that they're sharing a home, Greg's infatuation with a beautiful blonde woman only deepens.
I imagine with Greg, sex probably did play a big part in it. Tasha was very, very good at figuring out what made you go and what she had that she could use to bring you in and bring you close.
Greg described it as saving Tasha from something. It made him feel wanted and needed. This was a person who had been single his entire life. This was the time where he's coming in and being a protector and a savior of someone. And so he was just smitten with her.
Through the spring of 2004, Tasha feeds a constant stream of stories to Greg about Mitch's abuse.
She'd get off the phone and say all kinds of horrible things about him, and, this is the kind of stuff we're gonna have to deal with the rest of our lives.
And Greg believes every word that Tasha tells him.
I think that Greg's kind of thought and rationale behind it is who makes this up? Who's lying about their child or themselves being raped and molested, and it's someone that he loves and cares about telling him this, and so mistakenly so, he gave her all the credit in the world.
Greg is left with the impression that the other man in Tasha's life is a monster. and that he needs to do something about it. By the end of July 2004, Mitch has served his 5-week prison sentence for assaulting Tasha and returns home. Tasha drives out to see Mitch to talk about their daughter.
Greg, sitting in the car initially, sees Tasha and Mitch arguing. Greg comes up on the porch to try to calm the situation down.
But things don't go that way. Greg's interference only adds fuel to the fire. An already tense situation is about to explode.
There was some sort of verbal altercation about something, enough for Mitch to feel that he needed to defend himself.
Not even Tasha can anticipate what happens next.
Then Mitch reaches around, takes a chair, and just clubs Greg over the head with it, knocks him off the porch. They kind of get into a tussle. Greg and Tasha end up leaving.
The fight is never reported, but the bad blood between Greg and Mitch is now at a boiling point. To make matters worse, in August 2004, Greg and Tasha get married, even though Tasha never officially divorced Mitch. Soon after, Mitch decides he has to get away. He calls a friend in Virginia and makes plans to visit.
Mitch called me and asked me for help. Said he needed a job and a place to stay for a while because him and his wife was having problems, had to get away from her. I tried to talk to him about his marriage and why he wanted to leave and why he needed to leave, and all he would say is he just had to get away. That's all he would say. That's all he would elaborate on. So I knew that he was scared about something. I did. And I could tell in his voice that there was major problems. I could.
Mitch makes a plan to set out the next day for a fresh start in Virginia. But he never arrives.
I wait for a couple days, and Mitch didn't show up. I didn't know if he was setting me up. I didn't know what was happening.
No one's seen Mitch. He hasn't talked to his family, who he talked to regularly. There was actually a family function that he misses. No credit card activity, no bank activity, no vehicle, nothing.
Mitch Kemp has been fighting with his estranged wife Tasha and her new lover Greg, and now he's missing. The tension between the three has escalated into a violent incident, and Mitch knows he needs to get away. Is Mitch just laying low, or is something truly terrible keeping him hidden? Tasha Field's brief marriage to Mitch Kemp has ended badly. Amidst allegations of abuse, Mitch has come to blows with Tasha's new lover, Greg, and now Mitch has disappeared. After Mitch's run-in with the law and the fight with Greg, friends and family assume he's just lying low.
He had a warrant for his arrest, and sometimes those individuals don't want to be found. And so initially this was kind of treated as, hey, this is someone that's kind of hiding out. They don't want to be found.
Then in February of 2005, Tasha and Greg pack up the farm and leave town. No one in Columbia, Missouri hears from them again. Mitch's friends are left wondering what happened to him. They have no way of knowing. It will take years for them to find out. It's the spring of 2007. Almost 3 years have passed since Mitch Kemp disappeared. 800 miles to the south, Dwayne Barentine is waiting to collect his son from school in Marianna, Florida. He's about to get a nice surprise from a woman he has seen around the daycare center.
And one of her coworkers approaches me and said, Mr. Dwayne, I just want to let you know that I've got something for you. And I said, what is it? Well, it's a phone number from one of my coworkers.
The phone number belongs to a beautiful new teacher at the school. Her name is Tasha Fields. She's been living in the Florida Panhandle for 2 years. After divorcing Greg, she is newly single and on the prowl. after a series of failed relationships.
And somebody says, hey, Tasha's interested in going out with you, and here's her number. And of course, Dwayne was like, yeah, I'm gonna jump on that, and calls her.
We ended up talking on the phone for several hours.
Despite being attracted to the hot young teacher, Dwayne has some reservations about starting a relationship.
I've got a 3-year-old little boy. I've got full custody of him, and I'm raising him by myself. So really wasn't chasing women or anything like that.
But the next day, after school, Tasha comes over to Dwayne's house. She has one thing on her mind, and Dwayne is powerless to resist.
She definitely uses her body. She looked better the first day she came over to the house than she had ever looked at the daycare to me. I mean, she had on all the makeup. She had her hair flat ironed. And when she found out that I was laying down, she wanted to lay down too. So we both go and we lay down in the bed, and, you know, her operating style was, let's get it on. And that's pretty much exactly what she did, you know, and it was on from there.
I think Tasha should write a book about how to get men, because that female always had a guy in her life willing to protect and defend her no matter what.
It's Dwayne's first brush with Tasha's seductive powers. And from that point on, there's no going back. When Tasha was married to Mitch Kemp, his family claimed she manipulated him. Before long, she's at it again, pushing Dwayne to let her and her daughter move into his home. After years of instability, Tasha's little girl is yearning for a man to call her father.
You could tell that she really wanted the male figure in her life, as like my little boy wanted the female figure, you know. And I'll never forget when she walked up to me and asked me if she could call me Daddy. Maybe I'll be whatever you want me to be. And as long as it's all right with your mama, I said, you can call me Daddy, I don't mind. And I meant it.
Dwayne falls for the whole package. Tasha is not only seductive and beautiful and gorgeous and aggressive, but she also has a charming little daughter that also falls madly in love with Dwayne and wants him to be her father. And so it's this whole family image that is very appealing. Tasha uses a tactic with men that works. She understands a man wants to feel like a hero. She's a victim who needs to be saved. They are her knight in shining armor. It gets them very attached to her.
Tasha and her daughter move into Dwayne's house, and the excitement of the couple's early erotic encounter proves to be just the beginning of what's in store for Dwayne now.
She would call me up on the cell phone and say, hey, come in the back door when you come home. And she would meet me at the back door, and instead of high heels and a thong, I mean, in the back door into the bedroom, you know.
Tasha's not stupid. She realizes that sex is a powerful solidifier for a relationship. And when she meets Dwayne, she's looking more beautiful and sexy than she's ever looked before. And Dwayne has the best sex he's ever had in his whole entire life. And they're off to the races.
But Tasha has more tricks in her book than just sexy lingerie.
She would just go get a can of whipped cream and, you know, I don't know how graphic you want to get on this.
It isn't all about the thrilling sexual relationship. Dwayne is developing deeper feelings for the intense, attractive blonde.
Dwayne described that, yeah, the sex was very, very hot and heavy, but Dwayne also told me he was very much in love with her.
Life with Tasha seems too good to be true, and Dwayne is about to discover that it's just that. Not long after she moves in, Dwayne starts to notice that Tasha has a rather casual relationship with the truth.
I would witness certain things in life with her, and I would see the exact same thing that she saw, but when I would hear her tell this story to somebody else, it was so much more dramatic.
But Dwayne's starting to get the feeling that Tasha's beautiful exterior might be covering up a troubled past. He discovers the title to her car in the glove compartment. It's under the name Greg Morton.
I asked her who Greg Morton is, and, it takes her a while to come up with this story, but she's steady doing it, and it's as believable as anything, anybody could ever tell you.
Tasha claims that Greg Morton is her daughter's uncle and that he once helped them out. Greg's name is the first in a steady stream of names of men that slowly begin to come out of the woodwork. In a box of Tasha's belongings, Dwayne uncovers yet more evidence of his new girlfriend's shady past. Despite Tasha claiming that the surname of her child is Morton, Dwayne finds evidence to the contrary.
I actually found a bunch of baby pictures. As I kept digging in the pictures, I found some that said Kemp. And just the discrepancies in her story, it just didn't add up.
It makes no sense for another man's name to be written on the back of her daughter's baby photograph. Who is this mystery man named Kemp?
And I called her up and I was like, who is Mitchell Wayne Kemp? And she started crying immediately.
Tasha says, listen, Mitch is not a good person. He had a horrible past. And so I used this other name. That's how I've kind of presented myself. And Mitch Kemp could be dead in a ditch somewhere as far as I know.
Tasha confesses that she was married to Mitch, but it was a marriage of convenience.
I said, let me ask you something. How many times have you been married? And she told me she had been married 5 times.
Dwayne is shocked. At just 30 years old, Tasha has already been married to 5 different men. A picture is starting to come into focus in Dwayne's mind of a woman who is not who she says she is.
He just doesn't know who he's living with. Who is this person? Because every time he questions her, she gives an answer. It requires him to ask another question because the answer isn't accurate.
Now Dwayne wants to discover who Tasha Fields really is.
I really feel like I've got somebody in my house and I don't even really know who they are. Man, I use every tool on the internet I can possibly find. I mean, I was using people searches. I was, using online phone books, reverse phone number searches. I mean, I was doing everything in my power to try and find out what this woman was made of and, what her history and her past was like.
Dwayne Barentine thought he'd met the perfect woman. But just a couple of months into the relationship, some big questions have emerged. First, who are Greg Morton and Mitch Kemp? And most elusive of all, who is Tasha Fields? In August 2004, Tasha Fields was at the heart of a love triangle that ended in Mitch Kemp's disappearance. 3 years later, Tasha has left Greg Morton and started a new life in Florida with Dwayne Barentine. But now he's suspicious that the woman he's living with is not who she says she is. Dwayne is looking for a way to find out more about Tasha's past. In November 2008, Dwayne runs into one of Tasha's ex-boyfriends, a local man named Keith. Tasha's relationship with him ended only a few months before she moved in with Dwayne. When Keith finds out about Dwayne's problems with Tasha, he gives him a shocking lead.
Dwayne knows Keith, Tasha's, previous boyfriend. They have a conversation, and Keith tells Dwayne, you got to be careful with her.
Keith starts recounting disturbing and dramatic tales that Tasha told him when they were together.
One evening, according to Keith, they had had quite a bit to drink and they were talking. And it's at that point that Tasha starts telling him stories about her childhood being raped and about her father and all this kind of stuff. Just one crazy story after another.
This is old news, but Keith isn't finished. He has a far more shocking story to tell. And if it's true, it could change everything Dwayne thinks about Tasha.
I said, well, what else do you know? He said, well, I know she's involved in the murder of one of her exes. I said, Keith, do you believe that? He said, hell no, it's probably just about like any other lie she tells, you know. He didn't believe it. I really didn't believe it at that time either.
It seems too far-fetched to be taken seriously, so Dwayne lets the story go.
Tasha is a chronic liar and storyteller, and she embellishes stories, which is great if you're a novelist. It's great if you're a playwright. It's not great if this person's your lover.
A few months later, Tasha's lying comes to a head. Dwayne discovers that for the past several weeks, she's been cheating on him. It's the final straw.
I confronted her, and she denied it to the hilt. And I was like, look, you've got to go.
Tasha and her daughter move out of Dwayne's house. Dwayne might be finished with Tasha, but his quest to discover the truth about her past has only just begun.
Dwayne Barrentine is the reason why this case was solved. And it's just kind of funny because he was just acting like a woman's spurn, you know?
A stroke of luck hands Dwayne a clue about Tasha's past.
She had left behind the password to her MySpace page. And so he continues to dig into her past. And using that password, he's able to find out that she has yet again not been honest and truthful with him.
In the pages of Tasha's social networking site, Dwayne sees a familiar name.
He sees messages to Tasha from Mitch Kemp's family saying, Tasha, have you seen Mitch? He's been missing. We don't know where he is. Do you know anything?
Suddenly, the story that Keith told him about the murder Tasha said she was involved with seems a lot more plausible.
Seeing Kemp on all these documents, and that's when I knew, you know, they said they haven't heard from her or Mitch in over 4 years. So I was like, you know what? There actually was a murder, and this is the man who's missing.
While searching for the truth about his ex, Dwayne Barrentine has uncovered a bombshell. Mitch Kemp was the missing man from Missouri, and Dwayne suspects he was murdered.
With this information, Dwayne makes the ultimate move and he calls the sheriff's department in Marianna.
I couldn't lay my head down on my pillow at night and go to sleep knowing that I knew what happened to this man.
Florida police call their counterparts in Missouri, and the story checks out. Mitchell Kemp has been officially missing since August 2004.
And that's really what gets the ball rolling back here in Missouri, is that now we've got someone from another state calling us saying that they may have information on this case that we've treated as a missing person report for several years now.
Now the person police most want to talk to is Tasha Fields, Mitch's ex-wife.
Law enforcement pick her up and they bring her to the police department and they begin interrogating her. She's not under arrest.
At this point, investigators question Tasha cautiously, not wanting to let her know she's a suspect.
They wanted to find out from her, one, is there any truth to this? Kind of read her. And if there is, detectives at that point figured she's the key to finding this body.
Police don't let on that they've received any specific new information from Dwayne Barrentine.
They pull Tasha in, talk to her, very cordial. We just have some questions for you. We know that you were married to Mitch Kemp and he's the father of your child. What do you know about him? What do you know? And her initially is like, I don't know what you're talking about. He's a no good piece of crap. Who cares about Mitch? He's a liar.
Everything initially negative was about Mitch. You know, I think she even said about Mitch, he was nothing but a sperm donor. I mean, she just has nothing good to say about him.
Tasha has even less to say when it comes to Greg, except that she hasn't seen him since their split in 2006. Investigators wonder if something has happened to Greg Morton as well.
Him and I had our differences or whatever, but I don't have anything bad to say about him.
But by the next day, as cops press Tasha on her relationship with Greg, her story begins to change. Suddenly, she completely reverses her opinion of Mitch.
It goes from Mitch is a sperm donor to, okay, I think something bad may have happened to Mitch, but I didn't have anything to do with it.
Finally, after almost 4 years, the lid is about to be lifted on what happened to Mitch Kemp. When Tasha Fields met and seduced Dwayne Barrentine, she thought she'd left her past behind. But when Dwayne became suspicious of her behavior, he unearthed a shocking secret that had been hidden for 4 years. When police first questioned Tasha, she claims she doesn't know what happened to Mitch. But all of that is about to change.
Law enforcement, they had done their investigation up here, you know, and began to confront her with about some of these things. They are investigating this as a potential murder, and she knows what's going on. And so now it begins to switch from Mitch wasn't such a bad guy, it's Greg Morton that was the monster.
Now Tasha has a new story. She tells the authorities that for 4 years she's kept quiet about her husband Mitch's disappearance because she's been living in fear of a reprisal from Greg, who is living back in Missouri.
And then you hear that she's hiding from Greg and she doesn't want anyone to ever find out about it because Greg will kill her or do something very harmful if Greg finds out that Tasha spoke.
Tasha said, Greg Morton is a monster. Mitch was a good dad, a good father. I loved him. I just stayed with Greg because I was scared to death.
Tasha starts talking about what happened in Missouri. She says that Greg was furious after discovering she was still seeing Mitch, despite leaving him in the spring of 2004. Just a few weeks after their first altercation, consumed with jealousy, Greg confronts Mitch. In a violent fit, he shoots him and buries his body on the farm where they lived.
She does admit that Mitch is dead, you know, and that he's buried out there on that property. But she wasn't there. She wasn't anywhere around when that all happened. Greg told her about it.
With the guarantee of protection, Tasha says she finally feels safe enough to cooperate with police.
I can help you find the body. I wasn't there when it happened, but I know where he was buried.
When that happens, law enforcement are like, okay, time out, and they're grabbing maps, show us where you think, because again, central to them, they want to find that body. Everything will change if we can find that body.
On June 21st, 2008, police bring Tasha to Greg's farm to point out the spot where he buried the body.
When we take her out there, she looks over the property and she gives us kind of the area she believes it's the accurate spot. And so we do a huge dig on these people's property and we find nothing.
After hours of searching and no sign of Mitch's body, police call off the search. With nothing else to go on, police bring Tasha back in for more questioning to try to shake something else loose from her ever-changing version of events.
We all consulted about what's the next step, and we thought, let's turn up the heat.
They decide to use the thing she's most afraid of, Greg.
We tell her that we've talked to Greg. She becomes panicked, like asking, does he know where she is?
Not only that, police have an additional card up their sleeve. The story Tasha's ex, Keith, told Dwayne Barrentine.
Said, hey, we have information that you were more involved in this than you have led us to believe.
It's all they need. Tasha cracks under the pressure.
They get her to break and admit that she was there when it happened. Although she didn't have anything to do with it, she was there, she saw it happen, and she saw where Greg buried him.
Tasha points out a very specific area on the map of the farm where she says Mitch's body is buried.
Oh yeah, I'll come back. I'll show you exactly where this body's buried.
On August 9th, 2008, police return with Tasha to Greg's farm in Missouri. This time, Tasha is completely focused. She knows her freedom and possibly her life are on the line.
We fly her back a second time back to Missouri, and she goes right to the spot. And we literally, they hit ground, and it's like the next strike in the ground, and up comes, I believe it's a piece of a shirt or something, and we know that we've hit where the body is buried.
He had been buried about 5-6 feet deep. Still had his boots on, still had his jeans on. You know, he wasn't naked. There was a bucket that had shell casings in it that was also buried there with the body.
After a 4-year search, Mitch Kemp's body has finally been found. Police immediately begin an autopsy to establish the cause of death.
It revealed that there were bullet holes, multiple bullet holes in the bone structure of the body. And so Mitch Kemp was in fact shot multiple times.
The discovery of Mitch's body riddled with bullet holes appears to confirm Tasha's story. And on August 29th, 2008, police arrest Greg Morton.
There was a news report both in the paper and on TV that Greg Morton had been arrested for murder.
Initially, Greg refuses to talk, but eventually he changes his mind. And what he has to say turns the entire investigation upside down. After being missing for 4 years, Mitch Kemp's body has been found, riddled with bullets. Now the man arrested for his murder is about to spill the beans on what really happened. In an interview with police, Greg recounts that the day before the murder, he walked in on Tasha arguing with Mitch on the phone.
I believe Tasha was on the phone with Mitchell Kemp at some point right prior to this incident, and she was yelling, "Why did you rape me? Why did you do this?"
He's hearing them argue. He steps out of the house because he can't take it. He says he's angry, doesn't understand why she's still dealing with him.
We don't know if that phone call even really existed, if there was ever anyone really on that end of the phone.
Afterwards, Tasha tells Greg this is the final straw. After years of abuse, she's ready to do something about it.
So of course Greg is going to defend her. And that's just how Tasha was able to get these guys. They wanted to defend her. They wanted to help her.
In his confession, Greg claims that Tasha told him she had a solution, a way to ensure Mitch never hurts her again.
She comes out a few minutes later. She hands him a handgun and says, "I'm going to go get him. I'm going to get him out here. We're going to take care of this today."
Tasha leaves for Mitch's house. It's just a couple of days after Mitch makes the call to his friend in Virginia about getting away from what he knew was a volatile situation. Greg Morton testifies that on August 24th, 2004, he is waiting at his Missouri farmhouse. Eventually, he sees the headlights from Tasha's car. And when she steps out of the car, she's not alone. She's brought Mitch back with her.
He says he comes around the corner as they're walking towards the house. She's ahead of Mitch, heading towards the door. Mitch is about 6 or 7 feet behind him.
Greg says that Tasha is crystal clear about what she wants to happen next.
Tasha is smart about turning one lover against another lover. In this case, Greg against Mitch.
Greg comes from beside the house. Mitch sees him and says, "Hey, what's up?"
Mitch Kemp has no idea of the betrayal that is about to take place.
She begins screaming, "Shoot him, shoot him. He raped me yesterday. Shoot him, shoot him." Greg raises his pistol from about 15 to 20 feet, shoots him 5 times.
Greg and Tasha then bury the body on the farm. To his family and friends, it seems as if Mitch has disappeared. Tasha Fields is arrested, and on June 22, 2010, her case goes to trial. The key allegation against her is that she masterminded the murder, that she lured Mitch to the farm, luring him to his death.
That's where that word lure is so key. In Missouri, first-degree murder, you have to prove deliberation. And deliberation, it means that the person coolly reflected upon the matter before carrying out the act of killing somebody.
Greg might have pulled the trigger, but Tasha was the mastermind. She lured Mitch to his death, and she knew exactly what she was doing.
After being charged, Tasha still maintains her innocence and claims that Greg is the violent criminal. But the jury isn't buying her argument. In the end, the jury comes to the conclusion that Tasha's words were every bit as deadly as bullets. She's found guilty of first-degree murder and armed criminal action. Those people manipulated by Tasha are left to reflect on what's happened.
Oh, there's a lot of lives that have been affected by her. A whole bunch of lives. The little girl who now has no dad, no mom, and, the other brother, he lost his brother in this. He'll tell you, Mitch was my best friend. She sent my life into a tailspin. I won the unlucky lottery.
There is a profound, almost deceptive stillness that defines the South Pacific, a tranquility that permeates the air and dictates the rhythm of life on the remote islands. American Samoa is a territory defined by this rhythm, a place where community ties are woven deeply into the fabric of everyday existence, where isolation from the mainland United States fosters a tight-knit society bound by tradition, respect, and a collective sense of security. It is a jurisdiction where violent crime, particularly the kind that shakes the foundational pillars of law and order, is an extreme anomaly. For over 15 years, the men and women who wore the badge of the territorial police had patrolled the winding coastal roads and quiet villages without suffering the ultimate tragedy in the line of duty. The uniform commanded an inherent respect, not merely through the authority of the law, but through the deep familial and communal connections that link almost everyone on the island. To be a police officer here is to be a guardian of your own extended family, your neighbors, and your heritage. This unspoken pact of mutual respect and safety makes the events of July 22, 2010, all the more jarring, a brutal rupture in the historical peace of the territory. The morning began like countless others in Fagatogo, the administrative and legal heart of the island. The area serves as the central hub for the territory's judicial proceedings, a place where the gravity of the law intersects with the daily routines of the island's residents. At that time, the judicial system was operating out of a temporary Supreme Court building. The temporary nature of the facility did not diminish the importance of the work conducted within its walls, but it did create a unique environment, one perhaps less insulated and fortified than a traditional, permanent courthouse. The building was a hive of activity, characterized by the constant ebb and flow of human life that accompanies the administration of justice. By 11 o'clock in the morning, the sun was high, and the area surrounding the temporary courthouse was bustling. Inside, court sessions were proceeding according to the day's docket. Outside, the environment was a portrait of ordinary civic life. Lawyers in professional attire navigated the walkways, clutching files and preparing for arguments. Clerks and administrative staff moved purposefully between offices, while ordinary citizens, brought to the center of Fagatogo by various legal obligations or civic duties, mingled in the immediate vicinity. There was a low hum of conversation, the shuffling of footsteps, and the distant sounds of island traffic. Nothing in the atmosphere suggested impending violence. It was a perfectly ordinary midsummer morning, steeped in the routine administration of the law. Standing amidst this very ordinary scene were two men who represented the highest echelons of the island's security apparatus. Detective Captain Lucilla Brown was a man whose reputation preceded him. Within the ranks of the American Samoa Department of Homeland Security and the Territorial Police, he was not merely an officer. He was an institution. He was a veteran of the force, a man whose career was defined by an unwavering bravery and a deep-seated resilience. He had navigated the complexities of law enforcement on a small island for years, earning the profound respect of both his colleagues and the community he swore to protect. His presence was a reassuring anchor in the often turbulent waters of criminal investigation. He carried the weight of his experience with a quiet, authoritative dignity. On this particular morning, he was exactly where his duty required him to be, situated in the public space outside the halls of justice, keeping a watchful eye on the proceedings and the people. Beside him stood Major Satel Falafasai, another high-ranking official within the Department of Homeland Security. Together, they represented decades of institutional knowledge and dedication to the safety of American Samoa. They were positioned in the lobby and parking area immediately outside the temporary Supreme Court building. The two seasoned officers were engaged in a deep, professional discussion. Their conversation centered on the logistical and strategic elements of their daily responsibilities, specifically coordinating the security measures required for the ongoing judicial processes. They were evaluating the perimeter, assessing the flow of foot traffic, and ensuring that the day's court sessions could proceed without disruption. It was the quiet, unseen work of law enforcement, the preventative measures taken to maintain order before any threat can materialize. There was, however, a critical detail about their posture on that morning, a detail dictated not by a lack of vigilance, but by a strict adherence to judicial protocol. Neither Detective Captain Brown nor Major Falafasai was carrying a firearm. The regulations governing the temporary Supreme Court building were absolute and uncompromising regarding the presence of weapons. In an effort to maintain a sterile, secure environment within the halls of justice, firearms were strictly prohibited, even for high-ranking, on-duty law enforcement officers moving through the immediate precincts of the court. Consequently, these two veterans, men tasked with the overarching security of the territory, were entirely unarmed as they stood in the bustling public space. They were relying on the historical peace of the island, the inherent respect for their uniforms, and the unspoken boundaries of the courthouse to serve as their shield. The tragic irony of their situation was palpable. They were standing in the administrative center of their community, actively discussing the mechanics of security, while structurally stripped of the tools required to defend themselves against a sudden, lethal threat. They were completely exposed, vulnerable in a way that their vast experience and imposing presence could not mitigate. They were relying on a social contract that had held firm for over a decade and a half, a contract that dictated that violence, if it occurred, did not target the guardians of the law in the light of day. As the minutes ticked past 11 o'clock, the routine of the morning continued unabated. The lawyers continued their preparations, the citizens waited for their names to be called, and the sun continued to beat down on the pavement of Fagatogo. Captain Brown and Major Falafasai continued their conversation, their attention focused on each other and the immediate administrative tasks at hand. They had no reason to suspect that the safety they were actively working to maintain had already been compromised. They could not know that the peace of American Samoa, a peace they had dedicated their lives to preserving, was about to be shattered in the most brutal and unpredictable manner imaginable. The environment around them remained deceptively calm. The parking lot was a static scene of parked vehicles and passing pedestrians. The temporary courthouse stood as a symbol of order and due process. There were no raised voices, no sudden movements to draw the eye or trigger the finely tuned instincts of the two veteran officers. The threat that was moving toward them did not announce itself. It did not present as a disturbance or a visible altercation. It was silent, deliberate, and entirely unexpected. The atmosphere of ordinary civic duty provided the perfect camouflage for an act of unfathomable malice. In the world of true crime, violence often erupts from a buildup of tension, a visible escalation that offers some warning, however brief. But there are moments, the most terrifying moments, where the transition from absolute peace to absolute devastation is instantaneous. It is the violence of the ambush, the cowardly strike against the unsuspecting. For Captain Brown and Major Falafasai, standing unarmed in the sunlight, engaged in the quiet coordination of their duties, there was no escalation. There was only the serene, humid morning of July 22nd, the familiar surroundings of the temporary Supreme Court, and the quiet satisfaction of a job they knew intimately. They stood as sentinels of a peaceful territory, completely unaware that a figure driven by a deep, blinding hostility toward the very uniform they wore was closing the distance, bringing with him a sequence of events that would forever alter the history of American Samoa, rewrite the protocols of its justice system, and end an era of innocence on the island. To truly comprehend the magnitude of the loss that occurred on the morning of July 22, 2010, one must first understand the unique sociocultural fabric of American Samoa and the exceptional individuals who stand as its protectors. This is a territory where geography dictates destiny. Nestled deep in the South Pacific Ocean, thousands of miles from the mainland United States, the islands are defined by their isolation. This geographical separation has fostered a profound, almost unbreakable community cohesion. The culture is deeply rooted in mutual respect, familial lineages, and a shared history that connects virtually every resident. In such an environment, the concept of law enforcement operates on a fundamentally different paradigm than it does in sprawling, anonymous continental metropolises. Policing here is not merely the clinical application of state authority. It is a deeply personal endeavor. When an officer puts on the uniform, they are not policing strangers. They are patrolling the streets where their cousins live, responding to calls involving people they have known since childhood, and navigating complex social hierarchies dictated by village chiefs and elders. The badge is a symbol of authority, yes, but its true power derives from the community's trust and the officer's personal integrity. It is within this intricate, highly personal landscape that Detective Captain Lucilla Brown built his legacy. He was not just an officer, he was a cornerstone of the island's law enforcement apparatus. Serving simultaneously within the American Samoa Department of Homeland Security and the Territorial Police, his dual roles reflected a career defined by an extraordinary breadth of experience and a relentless dedication to public safety. To attain the rank of detective captain in a close-knit jurisdiction requires far more than just passing exams or accumulating years of service. It demands a proven track record of solving complex problems, a deep understanding of human nature, and an unshakable moral compass. He was a veteran in the truest sense of the word, a man who had dedicated the prime years of his life to navigating the darkest corners of human behavior on the island, yet he emerged with his reputation not only intact, but shining with universal respect. He was known for his resilience, his steady hand in moments of crisis, and his profound bravery. This bravery was not always the cinematic, loud kind of courage. Rather, it was the quiet, enduring fortitude required to stand between order and chaos day after day, year after year, in a community where every action is scrutinized and remembered. Standing alongside Captain Brown on that fateful morning was Major Satel Falafasai, another pillar of the American Samoa Department of Homeland Security. The presence of two such high-ranking, deeply experienced officers in one place was indicative of the gravity with which they approached their duties. Major Satel shared the institutional memory of the department, carrying the administrative and strategic burdens necessary to keep a modern security apparatus functioning within a traditional island society. Together, Brown and Satel represented the very best of the territory's protective shield. They were men who had seen the evolution of the island, who understood the delicate balance between enforcing federal mandates and respecting local customs. Their partnership was forged in the shared crucible of public service, a silent understanding between veterans who know the weight of the uniform and the sacrifices it demands. When they conversed, it was with the shorthand of men who have dedicated their lives to a singular, vital mission. The physical setting of their duties that day adds a profound layer of vulnerability to their story. Fagatogo serves as the administrative, commercial, and legal heart of American Samoa. It is a vibrant area where the functions of government intersect directly with the daily lives of the citizens. At the center of this activity was the temporary Supreme Court building. The very designation of the building as temporary speaks volumes about its architectural and defensive nature. Unlike permanent courthouses, which are often designed as imposing fortresses with highly controlled access points, reinforced structures, and clear perimeters, a temporary facility is inherently more integrated into its surroundings. It possesses a certain architectural permeability. It was a space retrofitted for justice, rather than built exclusively for it. This meant that the boundaries between the secure judicial environment and the bustling public streets were remarkably thin. The immediate exterior, the lobby, and the parking areas were shared spaces where the gravity of legal proceedings mingled constantly with the ordinary, unprotected flow of civilian life. On this particular morning, the area around the temporary Supreme Court was operating exactly as intended, filled with the routine hum of civic engagement. The docket was active, drawing a diverse crowd to Fagatogo. Defense attorneys and prosecutors prepared their arguments, moving purposefully through the corridors and the exterior walkways. Citizens, summoned for jury duty, traffic violations, or civil disputes, gathered in small groups, chatting softly or waiting anxiously for their proceedings to begin. Court clerks and administrative staff carried files between offices, ensuring the bureaucratic machinery of justice continued to turn. It was a scene of absolute normalcy, a testament to the orderly functioning of the territory's legal system. Into this tapestry of routine civic duty stepped Captain Brown and Major Sattel. They positioned themselves in the transitional space between the public exterior and the judicial interior, acting as the visible coordinators of security for the ongoing sessions. There is a singular, agonizing detail about their posture that morning that transforms the ensuing tragedy from a shocking event into a devastating betrayal of protocol. In strict adherence to the regulations governing the temporary Supreme Court, neither Detective Captain Brown nor Major Sattel Falafasai was armed. The courthouse mandate was designed to create an absolutely sterile environment, free from the threat or intimidation of firearms. This rule was applied universally, extending even to the highest-ranking, on-duty law enforcement officers moving through the immediate precincts of the court. To ensure the sanctity of the judicial process, these two veterans willingly surrendered their primary means of self-defense. They placed their absolute trust in the system they served, in the respect commanded by their uniforms, and in the fundamental goodness of the community they had spent decades protecting. They stood in the open air, managing the security of others, while rendered entirely defenseless themselves by the very laws they were sworn to uphold. This unarmed status highlights a profound psychological reality of law enforcement in American Samoa at that time. For over 15 years, the territory had not lost a single police officer in the line of duty to an act of violence. 15 years is not merely a span of time. In the context of policing, it is a generational shift. It is long enough for an entire cohort of officers to join the force, rise through the ranks, and establish their careers without ever experiencing the ultimate trauma of losing a colleague to murder. This remarkable statistic became a psychological blanket that covered the entire department. It fostered an environment where the threat of lethal, unprovoked violence felt distant, almost abstract. It was a beautiful, hard-won peace, a testament to the tight-knit nature of the island society and the effectiveness of community-oriented policing. However, this extended period of tranquility also created an illusion of absolute safety, a dangerous assumption that the uniform itself was an impenetrable armor against malice. Captain Brown and Major Sattel were not naive men. Their extensive experience meant they understood the darkness that human beings are capable of, and they knew the risks inherent in their profession. But their vigilance was naturally calibrated to the historical reality of the island. They were prepared for domestic disputes, for the escalation of local rivalries, for the predictable patterns of crime that occasionally surfaced in their jurisdiction. They were entirely unprepared for a completely unprovoked, heavily armed, and silently executed ambush in broad daylight at the center of the government's administrative hub. The peace they had helped to maintain for so long had inadvertently created the perfect conditions for a predator to strike without warning. They were operating in a reality where the social contract still held firm, unaware that a singular individual was actively moving to violently tear that contract apart. As they stood in the humid morning air, conversing about logistics and security deployments, they were completely exposed. They were visible representations of the territorial government and the justice system. For the vast majority of the people passing by, this representation inspired respect and a sense of order. The uniform was a signal of safety, but the uniform is a dual-edged symbol. To those harboring deep-seated grievances against the establishment, the uniform transforms the individual wearing it from a human being into a faceless embodiment of the state. Detective Captain Lucilla Brown, the respected community elder and seasoned investigator, and Major Sattel Falafasai, the dedicated public servant, were no longer seen as fathers, brothers, or colleagues. In the warped perception of the approaching threat, they were merely the closest, most high-value targets available to absorb a blind, furious retaliation against the system. The sun continued to climb higher over Fagatogo, casting sharp shadows across the parking lot of the temporary Supreme Court. The low murmur of legal discussions, the rustling of papers, and the distant sound of the ocean provided a calm, steady soundtrack to the morning. The two unarmed veterans continued their watch, their eyes scanning the crowds, looking for the familiar signs of disruption that they were trained to manage. They stood strong, anchored by decades of service and the profound respect of their community, completely blind to the fact that their illustrious careers, their unyielding bravery, and the historical peace of American Samoa were in the final, fleeting moments of existence. The stage was set, the victims were in place, stripped of their defenses by their own adherence to the law, while an unprecedented nightmare closed the distance, carrying a weapon loaded with a lethal, indiscriminate rage. The exact time was just past 11 o'clock in the morning. The humid tropical air hung heavy over the administrative center of Fagatogo, carrying the familiar sense of the nearby ocean and the exhaust of slow-moving island traffic. In the immediate vicinity of the temporary Supreme Court building, the atmosphere was defined by a steady, bureaucratic calm. Lawyers conversed in hushed, urgent tones, citizens waited patiently for their summons, and administrative staff navigated the walkways with arms full of legal documents. At the center of this routine civic machinery stood Detective Captain Lucilla Brown and Major Sattel Falafasai, two deeply respected pillars of the American Samoa Department of Homeland Security. They were engaged in a quiet discussion regarding the day's security deployments, their postures relaxed but observant. Because of the strict regulations governing the sanctity and safety of the judicial premises, both veteran officers were entirely unarmed. Their only shields were their badges, their decades of distinguished service, and the historically unbroken peace of the territory. They had no reason to anticipate that the very peace they had spent their lives cultivating was about to be shattered with unprecedented brutality. Moving through the scattered crowd of civilians, approaching from behind the two officers, was Siamo Jr. He did not draw attention to himself. He did not shout, he did not issue a manifesto, and he gave no verbal warning of the devastation he was about to unleash. His approach was cold, purposeful, and terrifyingly silent. Concealed within his grasp was a fully loaded 9mm semi-automatic handgun, a weapon brought into a space where firearms were strictly forbidden. The people walking past him, the clerks, the attorneys, and the waiting citizens, saw only another man navigating the courthouse exterior. None of them could perceive the lethal intent accelerating within him, driven by a deep, misguided hostility toward the justice system and the uniforms that represented it. He closed the distance methodically, his focus entirely consumed by the two high-ranking officers standing with their backs exposed in the sunlight. The transition from a mundane, peaceful morning to a scene of absolute horror was instantaneous. There was no escalation, no argument to draw the eye, and no opportunity for the seasoned instincts of Captain Brown or Major Sattel to register the impending threat. When Siamo Jr. reached point-blank range, he raised the 9mm handgun. The first gunshot tore through the tranquil atmosphere of Fagatogo like a physical blow. The sharp, deafening crack of the weapon was entirely alien to the environment, a sound that the residents of the island had not associated with an attack on law enforcement in over 15 years. The bullet struck Detective Captain Lucilla Brown with devastating kinetic force. The veteran officer, A man who had stood strong against countless challenges throughout his illustrious career had no chance to react, to defend himself, or even to recognize his attacker. The physical impact of the heavy-caliber projectile at such an extraordinarily close range caused Captain Brown to collapse immediately onto the hard pavement of the courthouse exterior. The suddenness of his fall mirrored the suddenness of the violence, a shocking and immediate loss of control dictated entirely by the unseen ambush. In the immediate fraction of a second following that first, catastrophic gunshot, a surreal suspension of reality gripped the surrounding crowd. Human brains, conditioned to the safety of the island and the routine of the courthouse, struggled to process the auditory and visual data. Bystanders froze, their conversations dying on their lips, their eyes turning toward the source of the noise in collective disbelief. But the violence did not pause for their comprehension. As Captain Brown lay on the ground, incapacitated and bleeding, the attack escalated from a sudden ambush into a deliberate, merciless execution. Siamo Jr. did not flee after firing the initial shot. He stood over the fallen officer, his posture completely devoid of hesitation or mercy. With chilling mechanical precision, the shooter angled the weapon downward and continued to pull the trigger. He fired multiple additional rounds directly into the body of Captain Brown as the officer lay defenseless on the concrete. Each subsequent shot was a deliberate choice, an action taken to ensure absolute lethality, guaranteeing that the highly respected detective captain would have no chance of survival. The echoing reports of the handgun struck the concrete walls of the temporary Supreme Court, amplifying the terror of the moment and cementing the reality that the unthinkable was occurring in broad daylight. Standing mere feet away, Major Satel Falafasai was thrust into a nightmare that defied every protocol and expectation of his extensive career. He was witnessing the brutal, ongoing execution of his colleague, and he was entirely stripped of the weaponry required to stop it. Yet, the instinct of a lifelong law enforcement officer, the deeply ingrained drive to protect and intervene, overrode any sense of personal self-preservation. Without a firearm to draw, without protective armor, and facing an active shooter who had already demonstrated a complete willingness to kill, Major Satel lunged forward. He attempted to physically bridge the gap, throwing his body into the line of fire in a desperate, heroic effort to shield Captain Brown and neutralize the threat with his bare hands. It was an act of profound, selfless bravery, an automatic response born of decades spent standing between danger and the vulnerable. But raw courage cannot outpace a bullet. As Major Satel moved to intervene, Siamo Jr. instantly registered the motion. Without breaking his lethal rhythm, the shooter pivoted, turning the barrel of the smoking 9mm directly toward the charging Major. At a distance where missing was impossible, the gun fired again. The bullet struck Major Satel squarely in the torso, tearing through his chest and abdomen with devastating internal consequences. The kinetic shockwave of the projectile halted the Major's forward momentum instantly. The severe trauma to his vital organs caused him to stumble and fall, collapsing into the growing pool of blood beside his fatally wounded colleague. In the span of mere seconds, the two highest-ranking security officials on the premises, men who embodied the safety and authority of the territory, had been systematically gunned down. The area directly outside the halls of justice, meant to be a sanctuary of law and order, had been transformed into a slaughterhouse. Two veteran officers lay on the pavement, their uniforms stained, while the man who had orchestrated the carnage stood above them, the handgun still gripped tightly in his hand, the scent of discharged gunpowder hanging thick and acrid in the humid tropical air. The realization of what had just transpired finally broke the collective paralysis of the crowd. The initial shock violently gave way to absolute, primal panic. The temporary Supreme Court building and its surrounding exterior erupted into utter chaos. The deafening, rapid succession of gunfire triggered a desperate stampede for survival. Lawyers dropped their briefcases, scattering confidential files across the grass and pavement as they sprinted for the safety of concrete pillars and parked vehicles. Citizens who had been waiting patiently just moments before now screamed in terror, scrambling over one another to escape the open firing line. Inside the temporary building, The sounds of the massacre outside caused an immediate lockdown of panic. Court staff and judges threw themselves beneath heavy wooden desks, barricading doors as the echoes of the shots reverberated through the thin walls. The organized, bureaucratic hum of Fagatogo was completely erased, replaced by the raw, frantic noise of a community experiencing an unprecedented trauma. People ran blindly, their only thought to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the man holding the weapon. Amidst this swirling vortex of screaming bystanders and fleeing civilians, the behavior of Siamo Jr. was singularly, horrifyingly calm. Having emptied his magazine and accomplished his grim, symbolic retaliation against the uniform, he did not run. He did not exhibit the frantic adrenaline of a man trying to escape the consequences of his actions. Instead, he lowered the weapon and began to walk away from the two bleeding officers. His pace was deliberate, cold, and entirely detached from the monumental suffering he had just inflicted. He turned his back on the carnage and walked toward his parked vehicle, his demeanor suggesting a chilling sense of completion. He moved through the chaotic scene like a ghost, indifferent to the weeping and the sirens that were already beginning to wail in the distance. His objective had been met. He had struck the ultimate blow against the system by executing its guardians in the light of day. However, the isolation of American Samoa and the dense concentration of law enforcement within Fagatogo meant that an escape was an absolute impossibility. The sounds of the heavy gunfire had instantly alerted every armed tactical officer stationed in the wider administrative perimeter. While the courthouse itself was a weapon-free zone, the surrounding precinct was not. As Siamo Jr. calmly approached his vehicle, heavily armed police officers, drawn by the unmistakable sound of a semi-automatic weapon discharging in rapid succession, descended upon the area. They sprinted toward the origin of the threat with their own weapons drawn, their training taking over as they navigated the fleeing crowds. They visually acquired the suspect just as he reached his car. Recognizing the immediate and ongoing danger, the responding officers moved with overwhelming speed and force. They swarmed Siamo Jr., shouting commands that cut through the lingering panic. Before the shooter could attempt to reload, barricade himself, or initiate a secondary standoff, he was violently tackled to the concrete. The weapon was forcibly stripped from his grasp, and he was restrained with an intensity fueled by the horrifying realization of what he had just done to their commanders. The threat was neutralized in a matter of moments, but the damage was irreversible. Back at the entrance of the temporary Supreme Court, the scene was one of frantic, desperate desperation. Bystanders and uninjured courthouse staff rushed to the sides of the fallen officers, applying pressure to their catastrophic wounds with whatever fabric they could find. The pavement was slick with blood. Paramedics arrived within minutes, their ambulance sirens screaming through the center of Fagatogo, but the medical reality was overwhelmingly grim. They immediately initiated trauma protocols, loading the two bleeding men onto stretchers and rushing them toward the Lyndon B. Johnson Tropical Medical Center. The ambulance ride was a blur of frantic medical intervention, a desperate race against catastrophic blood loss. But the wounds inflicted upon Detective Captain Lucilla Brown were simply too severe. The point-blank execution had destroyed vital systems beyond the capacity of modern medicine to repair. Before the ambulance could even reach the emergency room doors of the LBJ hospital, the seasoned detective captain, the respected elder of the force, succumbed to his injuries. He was pronounced dead, marking the first time in over 15 years that an American Samoa police officer had been murdered in the line of duty. Major Satel Falafasai was rushed immediately into emergency surgery. He would survive the ordeal after grueling hours on the operating table, but the heavy-caliber bullet had caused massive internal damage, leaving him with permanent physical scars and the indelible psychological trauma of watching his partner executed in the bright morning sun. The absolute peace of the island had been violently stolen, replaced by an agonizing grief that would forever alter the history of the territory. The aftermath of the shooting was not merely a logistical nightmare for the authorities. It was an existential shock that reverberated through the entirety of American Samoa. As the sirens finally faded into the distance and the chaotic, blood-stained scene at the temporary Supreme Court was cordoned off with yellow tape, a profound, Heavy silence settled over Fagatogo. The investigation began under the weight of an unprecedented collective grief. For the detectives tasked with piecing together the events of that morning, the duty was not just professional, it was deeply personal. They were investigating the murder of a colleague, a mentor, and a father figure to many on the force. The crime scene processing was conducted with a painstaking, somber intensity. Forensic technicians meticulously documented every casing, every blood spatter pattern, and every piece of evidence left behind by Siamo Jr. in his cold, calculated path of destruction. There was no need to hunt for the perpetrator in the traditional sense, as he had been apprehended at the scene with the weapon still in his possession, but the investigators were tasked with a much more complex objective: establishing an ironclad, indisputable narrative of malice, intent, and premeditation that would survive the scrutiny of the highest courts. Interrogations commenced almost immediately after the suspect was medically cleared and placed under high-security detention. The detectives who sat across from Siamo Jr. were men who had worked alongside Captain Brown for years, men who held back their own rage to ensure the integrity of the process. They sought to understand not just how he had done it, but why. The motive that slowly emerged from the cold, clinical transcripts of these interrogations was a stark reflection of a fractured, delusional worldview. It became clear that the murder was not the culmination of a single argument or a localized dispute, but the explosion of a long-festering, deep-seated resentment toward the legal establishment of the territory. Siamo Jr. spoke of perceived injustices, of a family history marred by run-ins with the law, and of a systemic failure he believed had targeted his loved ones. He viewed the American Samoa police force not as a body of public servants, but as an oppressive arm of a hostile state. His decision to target the courthouse was a deliberate act of symbolic violence. He had sought out the most visible, high-ranking representatives of the system to serve as avatars for his hatred, choosing to execute them in public to maximize the trauma and signal his rebellion. The discovery of this motive presented a massive, complex challenge for the prosecution. They were not dealing with a crime of passion or a spontaneous outburst. They were facing a defendant who had actively, methodically planned an act of domestic terrorism against the very guardians of his community. The investigation expanded beyond the immediate scene to scrutinize every interaction the suspect had had with law enforcement in the years leading up to the murder. They analyzed his digital footprint, his associations, and his behavioral history to construct a profile that could explain the transformation from a disgruntled citizen into a stone-cold killer. The investigators found evidence of a man who had isolated himself within a narrow, radicalized narrative, interpreting every routine police action as a personal slight or a targeted strike against his family. This psychological descent was documented with chilling clarity. It was a descent that left him with a singular, distorted purpose: to reclaim his power by stripping it from those who wore the badge. As the evidence gathered, the portrait that emerged was of a man who felt emboldened by his own perceived victimhood, a man who believed that the life of a police captain was a fair trade for the slights he perceived his family had suffered. As the investigation proceeded into the second month, the sheer weight of the evidence began to exert pressure on the defense. The defense team, initially hoping to lean on claims of temporary insanity or a complete break from reality, found their path obstructed by the overwhelming evidence of premeditation. The investigators had unearthed the path the shooter took to acquire his weapon, the way he had stalked the courthouse area in the days prior, and the calm, purposeful demeanor he maintained throughout the execution. These were the hallmarks of a man who knew exactly what he was doing and understood the legal and moral gravity of his actions. The prosecution, led by the Office of the Attorney General, began to assemble a case that would argue for the most severe penalty allowed under the law. They were navigating a legal minefield, as the territory's laws regarding capital punishment had remained dormant for over half a century. They had to argue not only that the crime deserved the ultimate penalty, but that the territory itself possessed the moral and legal standing to impose it. This created an incredibly high-stakes environment where every decision, every piece of evidence, and every procedural move was scrutinized by the entire community. The investigative process also required delicate handling of the survivors and the witnesses who had been present at the courthouse. Many of the staff and attorneys were still suffering from severe post-traumatic stress, struggling to reconcile the violent reality of that morning with the ordinary professional lives they had led just hours before. Investigators interviewed them repeatedly, their voices low and comforting, as they sought to reconstruct the precise sequence of events. Each testimony was a painful revisiting of the trauma, but it was essential to build the narrative of the shooter's cold-bloodedness. The witnesses spoke of the silence that preceded the first shot, the sudden, sharp violence, and the eerie, methodical way Siamo Jr. had finished his act. Their accounts were consistent, painting a picture of an executioner who was entirely in control of his faculties. This consistency was a devastating blow to any potential defense of diminished capacity. The evidence was absolute. This was a voluntary, intentional, and brutally efficient act of murder. During this period of intense scrutiny, the territory's police force underwent a profound internal transformation. They were simultaneously the victims of the tragedy and the enforcers of the law, a dual identity that created an incredible burden. They had to maintain their professional standard while grieving the loss of one of their most stalwart leaders. They set up internal support structures, counseling for the families of the victims, and a heightened state of alert that was both a necessity and a psychological reaction to the trauma. The murder had effectively ended the innocence of the force. They could no longer rely on the assumption of safety that had persisted for 15 years. Every officer who stepped into a public space now did so with a heightened sense of vigilance, their eyes scanning for threats that were no longer theoretical. The camaraderie of the department deepened as they rallied around Major Satel Falafasai during his recovery. His survival was a beacon of hope, but his scars served as a constant reminder of the violence they were now prepared to confront. The investigation also delved into the systemic security protocols at the temporary Supreme Court, which were rightfully placed under the microscope. The decision to maintain an unarmed perimeter, which had once been seen as a hallmark of a civilized, peaceful society, was now being reevaluated as a fatal vulnerability. Investigators consulted with national security experts to draft new, stringent policies that would ensure no officer would ever again be forced to face a lethal threat without the means to respond. This process was not without its own internal conflict, as it forced the territory to grapple with the tension between wanting to remain an open, accessible society and the necessity of hardening its defenses against a new, more dangerous reality. The investigative files grew to encompass not just the facts of the murder, but the entire history of the security protocols, creating a record that would serve as the foundation for a total overhaul of the judicial administrative environment. By the time the investigation reached its conclusion, it was clear that the state had constructed an airtight case. They had mapped the shooter's descent, documented his premeditation, captured the precise moment of his execution, and gathered the testimony of those who had witnessed his calculated indifference. The investigation had become a mirror reflecting the society's own loss and its demand for justice. It had transformed from a simple inquiry into a singular crime into an exhaustive exploration of why such an event could even happen in a place like American Samoa. As the files were sealed and prepared for the court, the investigators felt the weight of their duty finally begin to lift, replaced by a deep, hollow exhaustion. They had done their part. They had brought the truth into the light, and now the burden of judgment lay with the institutions of justice that had been so cruelly violated on the morning of July 22nd. The case was ready for trial, and the eyes of the entire territory and those of the Justice Department in the distant United States mainland were fixed on the proceedings to come. The atmosphere inside the courthouse during the subsequent trial was heavy with a gravity that seemed to compress the very air within the walls. The proceedings were not merely a search for a verdict. They were a collective reckoning with a tragedy that had effectively severed the history of American Samoa into two distinct eras, the time before the loss of Detective Captain Lucilla Brown and the time after. As the trial unfolded, the legal arena became a focal point of intense emotion, complex constitutional deliberation, and profound societal tension. The prosecution, representing the collective voice of a grieving territory, moved with a calculated, steady resolve to present the evidence they had spent 2 years meticulously curating. Every witness testimony, every forensic report, and every detail of the suspect's movements on that humid July morning was presented to demonstrate the cold, premeditated nature of the crime. The defense, meanwhile, faced the daunting task of navigating a landscape where public sentiment was overwhelmingly against their client. They leaned heavily into the argument of mental instability, attempting to paint Seduction Jr. not as a calculating murderer, but as a man whose psychological deterioration had rendered him incapable of comprehending the moral or legal consequences of his actions. They summoned mental health experts from across the Pacific and the mainland United States, their testimonies filling the court with clinical jargon that often felt jarringly sterile compared to the visceral reality of the murder they were meant to explain. For over 2 years, the trial stalled and surged, punctuated by endless procedural motions, deep examinations of the defendant's cognitive health, and the sheer logistical nightmare of coordinating expert testimony from overseas. During this time, the threat of capital punishment hung over the entire proceeding like a shadow. The Office of the Attorney General had taken the bold, historic step of pursuing the death penalty, arguing that the deliberate execution of a high-ranking officer in the line of duty constituted a crime so heinous that it demanded the ultimate forfeiture. This was a position that deeply divided the community. While the pain of the loss was universal, the prospect of state-sanctioned execution, a practice that had not been employed in the territory for more than half a century, forced a difficult, soul-searching debate about the values and the moral identity of American Samoa. The prosecutors held their ground, asserting that the law must reflect the severity of the act, while the defense continuously highlighted the defendant's documented history of instability as a barrier to such a final, irreversible sentence. The courtroom became a theater where the ideals of justice, mercy, and retribution constantly collided, each side arguing for a version of the future that would provide closure for a community struggling to heal. The turning point of the trial came as the body of psychiatric evidence reached its conclusion. After exhaustive rounds of independent examinations and testimony from world-class experts, the court arrived at a definitive, landmark ruling. The defendant was found to be fully aware of his actions at the time of the shooting. The court determined that while Seduction Jr. may have harbored delusions or deep-seated grievances, these factors did not translate to a legal incapacity to form intent. He had acted with the clarity of a man who knew he was killing, and he had executed that decision with the precision of a man who understood exactly what the result would be. This ruling effectively collapsed the defense's primary pillar, stripping away the argument that he was a victim of his own mind. With the issue of competency resolved, the focus of the trial shifted toward the inevitability of the verdict. The sheer volume of evidence regarding his premeditation, the acquisition of the weapon, and the calm, post-massacre conduct at the scene created an undeniable narrative of guilt that left the jury with little room for ambiguity. Recognizing the closing window for his defense, and facing the high probability of a death sentence should the case go to a full jury verdict, a plea deal was eventually brought to the table. This moment was arguably the most tense of the entire process. A plea bargain meant the avoidance of a death sentence, which in turn meant the avoidance of a long, potentially agonizing appeals process that would keep the community's wounds open for years to come. The prosecution engaged in delicate, painful consultations with the family of Captain Brown and with Major Satel Falafasai. The goal was to secure a result that acknowledged the severity of the crime while providing a measure of finality that the territory so desperately craved. When the agreement was finally presented to the court, it was met with a somber, stifling silence. Seduction Jr. stood before the judge and formally entered a plea of guilty to first-degree murder and intentional homicide. The admission was hollow, lacking any visible sign of remorse, but it served its legal purpose. The long, exhausting trial, which had been the focal point of the territory's life for years, was brought to a decisive, formal end. The final sentencing hearing was a brief, powerful, and deeply emotional conclusion to the legal drama. The judge, in delivering the punishment, spoke not just as an arbiter of the law, but as a voice for the community that had been permanently scarred by the events of 2010. Seduction Jr. was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. This was the maximum non-capital sentence available under the law, and it effectively ensured that he would never again walk the streets of the territory. However, the logistical management of this sentence presented its own unique set of challenges. Because of the limited prison infrastructure on the island and the palpable fear of social retaliation or unrest that would follow if the perpetrator remained in the local system, the authorities made a historic decision. It was arranged that the defendant would be moved off the island, sequestered into the federal prison system of the United States mainland. This ensured that he would be kept in a high-security environment far from the people he had terrorized, minimizing the risk of any further disruption to the island's peace. The final image of the trial was that of the legal machinery finally coming to a halt. As the defendant was led away in shackles, destined for a life behind bars in a distant, unfamiliar land, the courtroom emptied out, leaving behind a silence that felt like a release of tension held for years. The legal battle had been exhausting, yet it had served a crucial function. It had provided a structured, formal, and transparent venue to confront the horror that had visited their shores. The outcome, while incapable of bringing back the life that was lost or erasing the trauma suffered by those who survived, established a baseline of order. It signaled that the territory, despite its isolation and its desire for peace, was capable of the highest level of legal rigor when its foundations were attacked. The sentencing was the final chapter in the judicial response, but for those who had lived through the chaos of that morning in Fagatogo, it was merely the beginning of a different kind of challenge, the challenge of living in a world where the illusion of safety had been forever dismantled. The case of Siamo Jr. was now officially a matter of historical record, yet the scars it left on the institutional memory of American Samoa remained as vivid as the day the shots were fired. As the trial records were archived, they served as a permanent reminder of the fragile balance between the peace of the island and the darkness that exists in the heart of those who choose to defy the law, a balance that the territory would now spend every day going forward striving to protect and maintain. The echoes of the gunfire that shattered the peace of Fagatogo on that July morning in 2010 did not dissipate with the legal conclusion of the case. Rather, they transformed into a permanent, sobering fixture of the territory's identity. The aftermath of the murder of Detective Captain Lisla Brown and the wounding of Major Satel Falafasai initiated a radical, and at times painful, reevaluation of public safety in American Samoa. For a society that had long taken pride in its ability to manage conflict through the traditional, interconnected structures of island life, the realization that an individual could harbor such lethal intent against the pillars of the community was a traumatic awakening. The primary consequence was an immediate and total hardening of the administrative and judicial infrastructure. The temporary Supreme Court, once a space characterized by its accessibility and its integration into the daily life of Fagatogo, was retrofitted into a fortress of controlled entry. Metal detectors, X-ray scanning stations, and a constant presence of armed, vigilant security personnel became the new, unavoidable reality. This was a physical manifestation of the loss of innocence that the island had suffered. The era of the unarmed perimeter had been rendered obsolete by the blood spilled on the pavement, and the resulting measures were a direct, necessary response to the reality that malice could strike at any time, anywhere, even in the heart of the government's House of Justice. The psychological impact on the territorial police force was perhaps the most profound of all the lingering consequences. Before the events of 2010, the uniform was a symbol of communal guardianship, a role that brought with it a quiet, unquestioned authority. Post-2010, the uniform became something else, a target. Officers who had previously navigated the island's villages with a sense of ease now moved with a heightened awareness of those who know that their role is perceived by some as an existential threat. This shift fundamentally altered the internal culture of the police department. Trainings became more tactical, protocols became more rigid, and the focus on personal protection became an essential component of professional life. The survivors and the colleagues of Captain Brown carried the weight of his sacrifice as a daily burden. His name became a synonym for the ultimate cost of duty, a standard against which every act of courage and every failure in judgment was measured. The tragedy forced the department to professionalize its response to high-intensity threats, ensuring that no officer would ever again have to stand before a shooter without the means to defend their own life or the lives of their partners. The community of American Samoa, meanwhile, found itself grappling with a complex, lingering grief that did not easily subside. The loss of a figure like Captain Brown was not just the loss of a public official, it was the loss of an elder, a leader, and a source of stability for the community. The funeral services held in his honor were a display of state and traditional ceremony on a scale rarely seen, a testament to the profound respect he had commanded across all levels of society. When his name was officially engraved onto the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial in Washington, D.C., it served as a poignant, eternal recognition of the fact that the reach of his duty had extended far beyond the shores of his home. This national recognition provided a measure of solace to the family and the territory, grounding their local tragedy in the broader, American-wide context of service and sacrifice. Yet, the memory of that day remained a ghost in the collective consciousness of the people of Fagatogo. Whenever they passed by the area where the shooting had occurred, there was a quiet, involuntary pause, a recognition of the space where the fundamental promise of their island's safety had been broken. The long-term impact on the judicial process itself cannot be overstated. The trial had forced the territory to confront its own legal capabilities and its relationship with the federal laws of the United States. The debates regarding capital punishment, the handling of high-profile inmates, and the necessity of external, federal-level cooperation in cases of extreme violence became permanent features of the local discourse. The decision to relocate the perpetrator to a high-security federal facility on the mainland was a masterstroke of administrative realism. It removed the source of fear from the island's fragile social ecosystem and prevented the possibility of the prison becoming a site of ongoing tension or, worse, a focal point for future radicalization. This decision acknowledged that the island was too small and the connection between its residents too deep to safely house an individual who had committed such a spectacular act of violence against the state. The move was an admission of a new reality. The safety of the territory now required that it utilize the expansive, secure infrastructure of the nation of which it was a part. As the years passed, the incident became a cornerstone of the institutional training and history of the American Samoa Department of Homeland Security and the Territorial Police. Every new recruit, every training seminar on active shooter response, and every security assessment of the judicial buildings is conducted with the haunting lessons of July 2010 in mind. The tragedy is not treated as a distant, dusty chapter of the past, but as a current, vital warning. It serves to remind each generation of officers that their safety is not a gift, but a condition they must actively and constantly defend. The bravery demonstrated by Major Satel Falafasai, who rushed to his colleague's aid without regard for his own safety, remains the gold standard of professional courage in the territory. His story is told and retold, not as a celebration of violence, but as an illustration of the unbreakable bond that defines the life of those who choose to wear the badge. The memory of Captain Lucilla Brown has been preserved not through grand, statuesque monuments, but through the sustained, rigorous commitment to the safety of the people he spent his life protecting. In retrospect, the legacy of the murder is a paradox. It was a moment of absolute, irredeemable loss, yet it became the catalyst for the strengthening of the territory's protective shield. American Samoa transitioned from a state of naive, traditional tranquility into a more modern, wary, and professionally armored reality. The community learned that their remoteness and their tight-knit social fabric could not insulate them from the universal realities of crime and violence. They were forced to look into the mirror and recognize that the darkness they had long seen on the news from the distant United States mainland was a reality that could visit them in their own courthouses. This maturation was painful, but it was essential for the survival and integrity of the justice system in the modern era. The territory emerged from the shadow of the murder with a clearer sense of the risks they face and a more robust, professionalized apparatus to handle them. The story of the murder of Captain Lucilla Brown is, at its core, a testament to the resilience of a small society under the weight of an immense trauma. It is a story that emphasizes the fragility of order and the immense, often unrecognized courage of those who maintain it. The citizens of American Samoa now walk the streets of Fagatogo and navigate the corridors of their courthouses with a different understanding of their safety. They know the price that was paid for the order they enjoy, and they honor that price through a vigilant, collective commitment to the law. As the years grow into decades, the vivid, terrifying details of that July morning may soften in the memories of the bystanders, but the systemic changes enacted in its wake remain as clear and immovable as the mountain peaks that surround the island. The tragedy remains an indelible scar, yet it is a scar that has toughened the skin of the society, creating a resilience that ensures the law and the men and women who uphold it will stand firm against any force that seeks to undermine the peace of their beloved territory. The memory lives on in the quiet, focused gaze of every officer who stands watch in the courthouses, a silent, perpetual tribute to the man who laid down his life in the sun-drenched center of Fagatogo, securing his place in history as the protector who never abandoned his post. The final, enduring legacy of the murder of Detective Captain Lucilla Brown transcends the mere hardening of security infrastructure or the logistical adjustments to the territorial penal system. To look back at the events of July 22, 2010, is to understand the profound shift in the soul of American Samoa. For a territory that had defined itself for generations by the concept of Fa Samoa, the traditional, communal way of life characterized by mutual aid and social cohesion, this act of violence represented an intrusion of an alien, fractured ideology that left the island's foundational identity shaken. The killer, in his pursuit of a twisted symbolic victory, did not just end a life. He attempted to redefine the nature of power on the island. He sought to demonstrate that the institutional authority of the government could be rendered impotent by a single, desperate, and armed individual. However, the years that have followed the trial have proven that he failed in this ultimate objective. Instead of unraveling the social fabric, the tragedy acted as a crucible, forcing the community to redefine its commitment to the rule of law while simultaneously mourning a profound and irreplaceable loss. The resilience of American Samoa is best measured not by the absence of further incidents, but by the manner in which the territory embraced its new reality without losing the core tenets of its culture. The integration of modern, rigorous security protocols into the traditional island environment has been a delicate, ongoing process. It required the leadership to reconcile the necessity of armored protection with the desire to maintain a society that remains welcoming and transparent. This has led to a unique, hybridized model of law enforcement that values the personal, community-based connections that have always been the strength of the island, while backing those connections with the cold, reliable efficiency of modern technological and tactical standards. It is a model that recognizes the humanity of the officer while providing the armor that the humanity of the officer so desperately needs. Captain Brown's sacrifice serves as the silent standard bearer for this transition, a reminder that the human element of policing is both its greatest strength and its greatest point of vulnerability. Furthermore, the impact of this case on the legal consciousness of the territory cannot be understated. The debate that raged during the trial over the feasibility and morality of capital punishment opened a door to a more sophisticated, mature dialogue regarding justice in American Samoa. It compelled the judiciary to engage deeply with the complexities of the American legal tradition while interpreting them through the lens of a Pacific Island society. This dialogue continues to shape the decisions made in the courtrooms of Fagatogo today. The judiciary is more acutely aware of the nuances of mental health, the complexities of premeditation, and the far-reaching societal consequences of sentencing decisions. They are not merely applying laws. They are acting as the architects of a stable, modern society, a task that has become immeasurably more difficult in the wake of such a transformative tragedy. The rigor that was demanded by the case of Siamo Jr. has become the standard for all major criminal proceedings, ensuring that the reputation of the territorial justice system remains beyond reproach. As time moves forward, the story of the murder is increasingly told through the lens of institutional memory, becoming a foundational narrative for the next generation of law enforcement. Young officers entering the force today, who were perhaps toddlers or not yet born when the tragedy occurred, learn the history not through the trauma of memory, but through the professional rigor of their training. They understand the murder of Captain Brown as an inflection point that created the modern department they are now sworn to protect. The heroism of Major Sattel Falafaci is not treated as a mythic outlier, but as an attainable standard of service, a realization that the duty they have signed up for carries the risk of total sacrifice, and that their commitment must be total as well. This sense of continuity is what allows the department to heal. It converts the energy of the grief into a professional standard that keeps them grounded, alert, and focused on the safety of the territory. On a personal level, the healing for those closest to the incident remains a private, enduring journey. For the family of Lucilla Brown, the public recognition of his sacrifice serves as a steady, if bittersweet, consolation. They have seen his name honored in the capital of the nation and recognized in the halls of their own government, but those accolades cannot replace the man himself. Their survival and their ability to move forward with grace have been, in their own right, a quiet act of heroism. For Major Sattel Falafaci, his survival represents the continuation of a life that was almost taken, a life he has dedicated to mentoring and supporting the officers who follow in his footsteps. His presence in the department remains a physical reminder of the cost of the profession, and his resilience is a beacon for those who find the weight of the uniform beginning to feel too heavy. They are the human faces of the tragedy, and their dignity has played a central role in preventing the murder from becoming a symbol of defeat. The landscape of Fagatogo itself has also undergone subtle, meaningful changes. The area around the temporary Supreme Court, once a site of spontaneous, unprotected human interaction, is now a carefully managed environment. The physical changes, the security checkpoints, the camera arrays, the strategic lighting, are the tangible evidence of a territory that has learned to protect its own. Yet, in the quiet moments of the evening, when the offices are closed and the crowds have dispersed, the space retains a sense of solemnity. It is a place that feels historic, not just because of the court sessions it has hosted, but because of the blood that was shed in its service. It is a site of memory, a place where the ordinary nature of the work that was being done when the shots rang out provides a chilling reminder of how quickly the world can change. For the locals, it is a site to be respected, a place that is handled with a different kind of reverence than other public areas. As we look toward the future, the lessons of this tragedy are firmly embedded in the institutional DNA of American Samoa. The territory has proven that it is capable of confronting its darkest moments with clarity and poise, refusing to succumb to the chaos that the perpetrator intended to create. It has navigated the difficult transition from a traditional society to one that must account for modern threats, and it has done so while keeping the core of its community's spirit intact. The murder of Captain Lucilla Brown was a moment of profound, singular injustice, but the institutional response to it has been an act of justice that continues to manifest in the daily operations of the law. The territory stands today as a place where the rule of law is not just a concept, but a living, breathing reality that is defended by men and women who know exactly what it costs to maintain. In the final assessment, the life and death of Captain Brown have become the defining narrative of modern territorial law enforcement. His memory is the force that pulls the department together during moments of doubt, and his sacrifice is the anchor that holds the community to its principles. The tragedy will always be a part of the history of American Samoa, but it no longer defines its horizon. The horizon is defined by the efforts of the people to build a society that is safe, just, and resilient in the face of whatever the future may hold. The legacy of July 22, 2010, is not the violence that occurred, but the unwavering commitment of the territory to ensure that such an event remains an isolated, anomalous breach in an otherwise peaceful, orderly society. As the sun sets over the island of American Samoa, the peace that the citizens enjoy is the direct, intended result of the sacrifices made in the past. It is a peace that is earned, maintained, and cherished, standing as the ultimate tribute to the guardian who never broke his promise to his people, even in the final, fateful moments of his watch, securing his legacy as the eternal guardian of the Fagatogo he served with such quiet, unyielding honor. The story of July 22, 2010, is not merely a historical record of a tragic encounter in Fagatogo. It is a profound meditation on the resilience of a society when it is forced to confront the sudden, violent erasure of its own innocence. As the years have unfolded into the present day, the narrative has evolved beyond the shock of the crime and the clinical efficiency of the trial, settling into a permanent, quiet space within the collective consciousness of American Samoa. This final reflection requires us to look at the landscape of the territory not just as a location of a tragedy, but as a space of ongoing restoration. The murder of Detective Captain Lucilla Brown did not merely create a vacuum, it necessitated the construction of an entire philosophy of modern territorial safety. This philosophy is rooted in the recognition that safety is not a static condition, not a natural inheritance of living on a beautiful island in the Pacific, but a dynamic, earned state that requires constant vigilance, professional excellence, and a shared commitment from every member of the community. The institutional legacy of this event is best seen in the everyday operations of the Department of Homeland Security and the Territorial Police. There is a palpable difference in the air of the modern Fagatogo Administrative District. The procedures, the tactical awareness, and the institutional culture reflect an organization that has looked into the abyss and chosen, with intentionality, to stand on the side of order. When a modern officer puts on their uniform, they are not only carrying the responsibility of their rank, they are carrying the weight of an institutional memory that understands exactly what is at stake. The training programs are no longer focused solely on the localized, predictable challenges of island life. They have integrated global best practices, recognizing that even the most remote jurisdiction is not immune to the complexities of human malice. This evolution is the territory's quiet, persistent victory over the chaos that the perpetrator intended to ignite. It is a victory written in the boring, mundane, yet vital repetition of safety drills, security protocols, and tactical preparedness. On a deeper, more human level, the story of the sacrifice of Lucilla Brown remains a standard for the moral character of the entire territory. In a world where heroes are often stripped of their humanity by the media or forgotten as the cycle of news moves on, the people of American Samoa have managed to hold his memory with an extraordinary, persistent dignity. He is remembered not as a static figure in a history book, but as a living example of what it means to be a servant of the community. Every time an officer de-escalates a potentially violent situation, every time a judge makes a ruling with the weight of justice in mind, and every time a citizen engages in the process of law with respect and civility, the legacy of Captain Brown is upheld. The territory has effectively transformed his death into a foundational stone for its future. They have decided that the tragedy will not be a point of departure into cynicism or fear, but a point of return to the values that define their commitment to one another. The resilience of Major Setel Falafasai serves as the emotional anchor for this entire narrative. His ability to survive the trauma, to endure the physical and psychological toll of that morning, and to continue contributing to the safety of the island is an act of defiance against the cruelty that was visited upon him. He represents the living embodiment of the territory's refusal to be broken. His ongoing presence serves as a silent message to any who would contemplate similar acts of violence, that the guardians of this society are not easily extinguished, and that their commitment to the rule of law transcends the capacity of any individual to inflict harm. His story, and the story of all the survivors of that day, is a testament to the fact that while a person can be wounded, the integrity of a society is a far more robust, enduring entity. It is a lesson in the power of endurance and the necessity of moving forward with the memories of the past acting as a guide, rather than a shackle. As we look at the broader context of the American Pacific, the experience of American Samoa offers a powerful lesson to other jurisdictions about the fragility and the strength of the rule of law. It highlights the reality that in an increasingly interconnected world, even the most isolated communities must prepare for the unexpected intersections of violence and ideology. The territory has become a model for how a small, traditional society can adapt to the modern requirements of security while refusing to sacrifice the community-oriented soul of its identity. The balance they have struck between the hardening of their physical infrastructure and the preservation of their communal spirit is a delicate, admirable achievement. It provides a blueprint for how a society can hold its mourning and its security responsibilities in equal measure, ensuring that the former does not paralyze the latter. In the final, quiet moments of reflection, the tragedy of 2010 reminds us that the thin line between order and chaos is maintained by people who are often invisible until the moment they are called to make the ultimate sacrifice. Lucilla Brown was one of these people. He was a man who lived his life in the light of day, doing the work that ensured the darkness remained at bay, and when the darkness arrived, he stood exactly where he was expected to stand. The silence that now hangs over the Fagatogo district in the late hours of the night is not an empty silence. It is a heavy, respectful one. It is a silence that acknowledges the life that was given and the peace that was forged in the aftermath. The territory of American Samoa has succeeded in building a future that honors the past without being trapped by it. They have turned their grief into a mandate for excellence and their trauma into a foundation for resilience. The story ends as it began, with the quiet dignity of a people who know who they are and what they are willing to defend. The legal files may be archived, the perpetrator may be serving his life sentence in a distant facility, and the physical security checkpoints may be a permanent fixture, but the true legacy of the incident is found in the everyday life of the territory. It is found in the stability of the courthouses, the vigilance of the police, and the unwavering commitment of the people to the rule of law. The tragedy has been woven into the story of the island, not as a chapter of defeat, but as a testament to the capacity of human beings to endure, to adapt, and to protect the things that matter most. American Samoa remains, in the face of all it has seen, a testament to the idea that peace is not merely the absence of conflict, but the presence of a collective resolve to stand against the forces that would undermine the justice they hold dear. It is a place that carries its history with grace, standing firm as an island of order in the vast, deep blue of the Pacific, eternally guarded by the memory of the man who gave everything so that the safety of his people could continue, day after day, in the beautiful, sun-drenched center of the home he loved and protected until the very end. The watch is never truly over, for the responsibility of peace is a torch that is passed from one generation to the next, fueled by the memory of the light that was once held so bravely in Fagatogo. The final chapter of this narrative is not defined by the completion of a legal process or the physical transformation of a courthouse district, but rather by the ongoing act of remembrance that has become embedded in the daily life of the territory. As we reflect on the years that have passed since that dark day in 2010, the significance of the tragedy becomes clearer, not as an isolated incident, but as a defining moment in the modern history of American Samoa. The murder of Detective Captain Lucilla Brown served as a profound interruption to the perceived trajectory of the island's peace, a violent confrontation with the reality that the world beyond the horizon was increasingly capable of encroaching upon the remote tranquility of the South Pacific. This realization forced the people of the territory to re-examine their understanding of safety, authority, and the role of the individual in maintaining the integrity of the collective whole. It was a transition from an era of implicit trust to an era of active, informed vigilance. The most lasting impact, however, is found in the quiet, unspoken language of the community. In the years since the tragedy, the act of walking through Fagatogo has become, for many, an act of silent acknowledgement. The spaces that were once merely functional settings for government and legal business have taken on a weight of history. The parking lot, the walkways, and the lobby of the judicial buildings are now vessels of collective memory. When the people of American Samoa engage with these spaces, they are participating in a quiet, daily ritual of honoring the man who stood in those exact spots and refused to retreat. This is a subtle but powerful form of resistance against the oblivion that violence seeks to create. It is a refusal to let the tragedy be relegated to the dusty corners of a legal archive. Instead, it is brought into the light of the present, serving as a reminder that the peace the citizens currently enjoy is the product of a profound and costly sacrifice. The transformation of the Department of Homeland Security and the Territorial Police into a more modern, professionally integrated force is perhaps the most tangible evidence of the territory's commitment to the future. This evolution was not achieved without internal struggle, as it required balancing the desire for traditional, personal approaches to policing with the harsh demands of contemporary tactical reality. The leadership of the department navigated this transition with a focus on preserving the heart of the force while hardening its edges. They have succeeded in building an organization that is both deeply rooted in the communal values of the island and equipped to handle the complex, unpredictable nature of modern security threats. This professionalization is a direct response to the lessons learned in the wake of the loss of Captain Brown. It is a commitment to ensuring that the next generation of officers is prepared, supported, and armored against the darkness in a way that their predecessors, constrained by the protocols of a more innocent time, simply could not be. Furthermore, the broader societal discourse on justice and crime that was ignited by the trial has continued to mature. The territory has shown a remarkable capacity to hold difficult conversations about the nature of its laws, the limits of its judicial infrastructure, and the moral responsibilities of its citizens. The debate over capital punishment, the handling of the perpetrator, and the long-term management of high-risk prisoners have all contributed to a more robust, sophisticated understanding of the territory's place within the broader framework of the American justice system. This is a sign of a society that is not merely reacting to events, but is actively shaping its own future through careful, deliberative thought. The ability to look at their own laws and procedures with a critical, honest eye is a hallmark of a society that has reached a new level of maturity and self-awareness in the face of its own trauma. The ongoing recovery of Major Satel Falafasai and his continued presence within the ranks of the police force serves as a vital bridge between the past and the present. His story is one of enduring courage, a testament to the fact that the human spirit, while scarred, possesses an incredible capacity to continue the work of service. He stands as a living reminder of the reality of the danger they face, but more importantly, he stands as a symbol of the resilience of the men and women who continue the watch. His mentorship of junior officers is a vital part of the internal healing process, ensuring that the lessons learned from the sacrifice of Captain Brown are not just theoretical, but are passed down through the lived experience of those who have stood on the front lines. He is the guardian who remained, the voice of the past in the ear of the future, reminding them always of the cost and the honor of their commitment. As the territory continues to navigate the complexities of the 21st century, the memory of July 22, 2010, will continue to serve as an anchor. It will remind the people of American Samoa that their peace is not guaranteed, and that their community is the most important asset they possess in defending that peace. The strength of their interconnected social fabric, which was once thought to be their only line of defense, is now understood as the foundation upon which their more modern, rigorous security protocols are built. They have learned that modern tactics and traditional values are not mutually exclusive, but are, in fact, complementary when guided by a clear, shared purpose. The tragedy has taught them that the most effective way to honor the past is to build a future that is safer, stronger, and more resilient. This is the ultimate tribute to the guardian who fell in the service of his people, ensuring that his legacy is not defined by the violence he faced, but by the safety he secured for those who followed. The silence that currently envelopes the administrative district in the early hours of the morning is a silence of respect and purpose. It is a space that has been claimed by the community, not just for the purposes of government, but for the purposes of reflection and remembrance. As the residents of American Samoa go about their daily lives, as they raise their children, build their businesses, and contribute to the vibrant culture of their island, they do so in an environment that has been shaped by the necessity of resilience. They are a people who have proven, in the most painful of ways, that they can withstand the force of a sudden, brutal intrusion and emerge with their sense of justice and their commitment to one another intact. This is the true measure of their success, a success that is reflected in every peaceful day that passes on their beautiful, isolated home. In concluding this reflection, we must acknowledge that the story of Captain Lucilla Brown is, at its core, a story about the sanctity of the duty that is held by those who stand between the vulnerable and the threat. It is a duty that is often thankless, frequently misunderstood, and occasionally lethal. Yet it is a duty that is essential for the flourishing of any free society. The people of American Samoa have understood this truth more deeply than perhaps any other community in the Pacific. They have internalized the lesson that the price of their order is a constant, vigilant sacrifice, and they have chosen to pay that price with a grace and a dignity that commands admiration. As the sun rises over the horizon, casting its light on the peaks of the mountains and the blue expanse of the surrounding ocean, it shines on a territory that is both aware of its fragility and confident in its strength. The watch continues, not because it is forced upon them by necessity, but because it is an act of love and duty toward the community they serve. The memory of the one who stood firm is the light that guides them, a perpetual, silent force that ensures that the peace of the island is never taken for granted, and that the sacrifice made in the sun-drenched center of Fagatogo remains the eternal, foundational promise of a society that will never again allow its innocence to blind it to the reality of the darkness that exists in the heart of those who defy the law. The promise is kept in every action, in every day of service, and in every quiet moment of reflection, cementing the legacy of a man who served until his last breath and who continues to serve, in memory and spirit, as the true guardian of the territory he loved above all else, ensuring that the legacy of his life remains as vibrant and as enduring as the island he protected. The finality of this account, the 10th and concluding segment in our exploration of the tragedy at Fagatogo, brings us to a profound intersection of memory, justice, and the perpetual state of territorial governance. If we were to distill the essence of the murder of Detective Captain Lucilla Brown and the subsequent wounding of Major Satel Falafasai into a singular theme, it would be the concept of institutional transformation born from absolute devastation. The journey we have traced, from the sun-drenched, deceptively quiet morning of July 22, 2010, through the exhausting, unprecedented legal battles to the systemic fortification of the island's security apparatus, is a testament to how a small society reconciles with the sudden, violent rupture of its historical peace. We find that the narrative of this tragedy does not conclude with the incarceration of the perpetrator or the finalization of the court documents. Rather, it persists as an active, living component of the territory's identity. The island of American Samoa, in its relative isolation, has successfully demonstrated that the capacity for resilience is not merely a survival mechanism, but a sophisticated, evolving state of mind that allows a community to absorb profound trauma and emerge with a more refined understanding of its own vulnerabilities and strengths. We must consider the architectural and administrative legacy left behind in Fagatogo. The transformation of the temporary Supreme Court into a highly regulated, monitored, and secure facility is more than just a matter of metal detectors and security guards. It is a permanent rejection of the naivety that allowed the ambush to succeed. This infrastructure serves as a daily, silent dialogue between the present and the past. Every citizen who passes through the security checkpoint, every attorney who navigates the controlled access points, and every officer who stands guard is participating in a ritual of remembrance. The structures themselves act as a bulwark against the return of that dark day, ensuring that the vulnerability, which was exploited by Siamo Jr., is a historical artifact rather than a present-day reality. This hardening of the environment is the territory's way of saying that it has learned its lesson, that it values the sanctity of its legal proceedings too much to ever again permit the possibility of such a callous, unprovoked assault. The investment in these physical defenses is an investment in the promise that the rule of law will remain protected and that the servants of that law will not be left to face lethal threats with empty hands. Beyond the physical, the internal culture of the law enforcement community in American Samoa has been fundamentally restructured. The loss of Captain Brown necessitated a complete overhaul of training, tactical doctrine, and the fundamental approach to officer safety. The forced transition from a model that relied almost entirely on the social cohesion of the island to one that incorporates the best practices of modern, tactical policing. This shift was not an abandonment of the traditional FAA Samoa values, but an integration of those values with the necessary rigors of contemporary security. The modern officer is a product of this integration, someone who understands the cultural nuances of their village while being prepared for the stark, lethal realities of an active shooter scenario. This professionalization is the ultimate tribute to the fallen. It ensures that the knowledge gained through blood and trauma is passed on, serving as a protective shield for those who have stepped forward to fill the void left by their predecessors. The force today is more capable, more alert, and more cognizant of the fragility of the peace they are sworn to maintain. The legal and judicial aftermath has similarly left an indelible mark on the territory's constitutional character. The debates that took place during the trial, particularly regarding the death penalty, provided a foundation for a more mature, robust legal discourse. American Samoa proved that it was capable of handling a complex, high-stakes capital case with a level of transparency and adherence to due process that was consistent with the highest standards of the American judicial system. This demonstrated that even a small, remote territory could uphold the rule of law with absolute integrity, regardless of the emotional intensity or the societal pressures that accompanied the proceedings. The judiciary emerged from the trial with a renewed sense of purpose and a deeper understanding of its critical role in preserving the order of the island. The lessons learned during those 2 years of litigation, the importance of independent psychiatric evaluation, the necessity of absolute procedural fairness, and the need for a clear, documented path to justice, have become ingrained in the territorial legal culture, setting a standard for all future cases of serious criminal conduct. In considering the personal journey of the survivors, we are reminded that the impact of such a tragedy is measured in human lives, not just in policies or structural changes. The return of Major Satel Falafasai to the workforce and his continued contributions to the safety of his people stands as perhaps the most significant victory against the perpetrator's intent. By choosing to continue his service, by choosing to mentor others, and by choosing to remain a visible pillar of the department, Major Satel effectively neutralized the shooter's goal of destroying the territory's security leadership. He transformed his survival into a narrative of endurance, providing a model for his colleagues of what it means to be a servant of the community in the face of insurmountable odds. His presence is a living link to the events of 2010, a bridge that connects the past sacrifice to the ongoing labor of the present, ensuring that the lessons of the past are never viewed as distant, academic concepts. The community's capacity for grief and healing has also been a remarkable demonstration of its strength. The ability to mourn a leader like Detective Captain Lucilla Brown without descending into a cycle of vengeful, divisive rhetoric speaks volumes about the maturity of the society. The territory chose the path of justice and legal resolution over the path of reactionary chaos, and in doing so, it affirmed the stability of its social order. The collective remembrance of the man who died in the line of duty has become an essential part of the territory's cultural life, a shared experience that reinforces the communal bonds that define the people of American Samoa. This mourning, while painful, served to knit the community together in a way that mere prosperity or political stability never could. It revealed the shared values that the people are willing to stand for, and it reinforced the idea that the sacrifice of one of their own is a tragedy that is shared by the whole, and as such, is a burden they are all committed to carrying together. Looking forward, the perspective of American Samoa on its own future is undoubtedly clearer and more sober than it was before the murder. The territory has accepted the reality that it is no longer the sheltered, isolated paradise it once believed itself to be, and it has adopted a proactive, determined stance on its own protection. The current state of the territory is one of stability, grounded in the knowledge that order is not a given. This maturity is reflected in the way the territory engages with its regional partners and with the federal government of the United States. It is a territory that is confident in its ability to manage its own affairs, while fully recognizing the value of the security and structural support that the broader system provides. This balance is the hallmark of a society that has come of age through trial and error, through triumph and tragedy, and through the steadfast commitment of its citizens to the ideal of peace. As we conclude this long and detailed exploration of a tragedy that will forever remain a cornerstone of American Samoa's modern history, we are left with a final sense of respect for the territory's journey. The murder was a moment of profound darkness, but the institutional, cultural, and personal responses to it have been a collective effort to keep the light of justice burning bright. We see that the legacy of Captain Brown is not found in the sorrow of his death, but in the strength of the society that chose to learn from his sacrifice. We see it in the way the courthouse doors now close with a secure, heavy thud, and in the way the officers now patrol the streets of Fagatogo with a focused, professional gaze. We see it in the resilience of a people who have proven that they are the architects of their own peace, a peace that is earned, defended, and cherished above all else. The watch is indeed never over, for the responsibility of maintaining a just society is a permanent and unending commitment. The memory of the man who fell is a part of that commitment, a silent, enduring presence that guides the territory through the challenges of each new day. We leave the shores of American Samoa with the conviction that the peace they enjoy today is a tribute to the man who gave his life for it, and that the order they maintain is a reflection of the profound and unbreakable bond between the citizens and the guardians of their community. Their future, while always subject to the unpredictable winds of human behavior, is now guarded by a resolve that is tempered by the memory of the past. The sacrifice of Lucilla Brown was not in vain, for it ensured that the flame of justice would never flicker out in the sun-drenched center of the island he served. It is a legacy that endures in every quiet act of duty, in every sound of the law being upheld, and in the persistent, unwavering faith that no matter the darkness that may occasionally visit, the community will always stand firm, united in its purpose and protected by the memory of the guardian who stood his ground until the final, immortal end of his watch. The conclusion of our narrative, spanning through the intricate layers of a tragedy that reshaped the soul of a territory, leads us finally to a synthesis of everything that has transpired since the morning of July 22, 2010. We have traversed the landscape of loss, the rigors of a historic legal battle, and the systemic metamorphosis of an entire government's security philosophy. Yet, to end here is to recognize that a story of this magnitude never truly reaches a final stop. Instead, it becomes a permanent, living thread in the fabric of American Samoa's existence. The life and death of Detective Captain Lucilla Brown have effectively become the baseline against which the territory measures its commitment to the rule of law. It is a haunting, yet constructive baseline. The permanence of this memory is not a weight that pulls the community down into despair, but rather a ballast that keeps the society steady amidst the unpredictable currents of the modern world. Every law enforcement agency, every judicial body, and every administrative office in the territory now operates with the implicit understanding that the peace they preside over is a gift bought at an extraordinary price. When we consider the broader impact of this tragedy, we see that it catalyzed a shift from an inherited security posture to a chosen one. The territory essentially reclaimed its own sovereignty over its safety. By deciding to overhaul its judicial environment, by choosing to pursue a rigorous legal process that culminated in a historic life sentence without parole, and by ensuring the perpetrator was removed to a federal facility on the mainland, American Samoa demonstrated a sophisticated maturity. It proved that it could manage its own internal crises while utilizing the constitutional protections and resources of the United States. This was a triumph of governance. It meant that the territory could absorb the shock of a domestic terror event and, rather than becoming fractured or polarized, could come together to establish a new standard of excellence in public safety. The strength of this response was fundamentally tied to the community's shared sense of grief. The loss was felt not just by the police department, but by every family and village that respected the uniform and the man who wore it with such distinction. The architectural changes in Fagatogo, the hardened perimeter, the controlled access points, and the omnipresent security are the physical manifestations of this maturity. They represent a society that has grown up. There is a certain beauty in the way the territory has balanced these necessities with its traditional culture. The security measures have been implemented in a way that respects the dignity of the citizens and the sanctity of the judicial process. This balance is the true legacy of the trial and the subsequent reforms. It acknowledges that while human nature can be capable of the most heinous, unprovoked violence, the structures of a civilized society can be engineered to prevent that violence from ever reaching its objective. This is a message of hope. It declares that justice, when empowered by the resolve of a community, is stronger than the fleeting, destructive impulse of any single individual. The courthouse is no longer just a place for legal arguments. It is a monument to the resilience of the law itself. We also return to the resilience of Major Setel Falafasai. His survival and continued presence within the community are vital to the narrative's integrity. He represents the survival of the institution. When he walks through the halls of the Department of Homeland Security, he is the living evidence that the department was not defeated. His scars, though hidden beneath his uniform, are the map of a battle that he continues to win every day he chooses to serve. His story inspires a new generation of officers to recognize that their profession is not just a career, but a calling that requires the ability to endure, to recover, and to maintain one's focus despite the most profound personal and professional trauma. He is the bridge between the old way and the new, the veteran who knows the cost of the path and continues to walk it with a steady, determined pace, ensuring that the legacy of his fallen partner is never lost in the march of time. The communal healing process, while ongoing, has taken on a character of quiet, dignified perseverance. The people of American Samoa have developed a unique way of carrying this history. They do not hide from it, nor do they fixate on it in a way that generates further trauma. They acknowledge it as a part of their story, a painful, transformative chapter that taught them more about their own character than they might have otherwise learned. This is the mark of a truly resilient society. It is a society that can integrate its tragedies into its broader identity, using them as reference points for growth rather than as justifications for cynicism. The memory of Captain Brown is honored not through grandiosity, but through the consistent, quiet demonstration of the virtues he held: bravery, service, and an unshakable belief in the importance of his duty. This is the ultimate, personal tribute to a life lived in service to the whole. As we look across the Pacific toward the broader landscape of the 21st century, the experience of American Samoa serves as a poignant reminder of the vulnerability of small, peaceful communities. It provides a blueprint for what it looks like to stand firm when the world, or the darker corners of it, comes knocking at the door. The territory has shown that even the most remote home can be fortified, and that its people can define their own destiny by the strength of their response to the unthinkable. This is a victory that is not won in a single day or in a single trial, but in the slow, persistent accumulation of good decisions, right actions, and the constant refusal to let the spirit of the community be extinguished by fear. The territory stands as a beacon for the power of the rule of law, proving that no matter where it is applied, even on a remote island in the South Pacific, the promise of justice can be held, protected, and honored. The watch, then, continues in the spirit of the man who never once abandoned it. The officers patrolling the roads of Pago Pago, the attorneys arguing in the halls of justice in Fagatogo, and the citizens going about their lives in the villages of the island are all participants in this ongoing act of restoration. They are the ones who make the peace a reality, through their actions and through their commitment to the society they have built. The tragedy is no longer a wound that bleeds. It is a part of the bedrock upon which the modern stability of the territory rests. It is a foundation that is tested every day, and every day the territory passes the test. This is the enduring, immortal legacy of July 22, 2010. It is a legacy that belongs to everyone who calls the territory home, a shared responsibility that is guarded with the same quiet, unyielding honor that Lucilla Brown demonstrated until his final breath. In our final moment of this account, we acknowledge that the story is truly the story of the territory itself. It is a story of a people who looked into the face of a nightmare and did not blink. They navigated the darkness, held the hand of their survivors, buried their hero with the highest honors, and then set to work building a future that would ensure such a day would never happen again. They have succeeded in this goal not through the eradication of all danger, but through the creation of a system that is prepared for it, a culture that is resistant to it, and a memory that is honored by the daily, routine excellence of those who keep the peace. The sacrifice of Captain Brown has been transmuted into the lifeblood of the institution he served. He is, in a sense, ever present in the corridors he once walked, in the security protocols he helped to inspire, and in the quiet resolve of every man and woman who now carries the weight of the badge in the territory of American Samoa. His story is complete, but his influence is ongoing, a perpetual, silent force for order and justice in the Fagatogo he cherished. The island moves forward, guided by the memory of the one who stood his ground, a guardian whose legacy is the safety of his people and the enduring, unbreakable strength of the home he protected until his final, immortal end, leaving the territory forever changed but forever stronger, standing firm in the light of the justice he served until the end of his watch, and into the eternity of the history he helped to define. The story of his sacrifice remains the absolute, foundational promise of a society that has learned to protect its own, ensuring that the light of the Fagatogo he knew continues to burn bright, safe, and free, under the watchful, eternal guard of the officer who never, ever broke his promise, standing as the eternal symbol of a duty that knows no end, reflecting the beauty and the strength of the islands he loved, and the enduring power of a service that transcends the fragility of life itself, securing his place in the heart of the territory forever.